I'd like to introduce Alan Gravano as the president of IASA.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to be brief tonight since this is International Women's Day that we're celebrating and having this IASA webinar. So I want to thank all of you for coming. Courtney's also going to talk about next month. We haven't finalized on a date and time for our April webinar, but we will have a brief announcement at least about the authors who will be speaking. And then I want to turn it over to Courtney, who has been the driving force behind the webinar, especially for this year. She has really just taken the reins and has scheduled all the webinars that we have through the summer, I believe. So I want to thank all of our presenters tonight personally for agreeing to do this. We're very excited to have them here, and I'm going to turn it over to Courtney. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Yes, so our next webinar in April, and it'll be the date and time coming up soon. We just have to do a doodle poll and get everybody on the same page. It's a tribute to Diana de Prima. And we have Maria Gillen, Rudy de Prima, his sister Dominique, Diana's son and daughter, and a good friend, Rachel DeBrise. So that should be a really great webinar. Before we start tonight, you know, this is International Women's Day, and it's really a nice thing. Thank you so much, Ellen, for that really warm opening. You know, I wanted to take a minute and say that at IASA, we have had 2 female presidents since 1966. Mary Jo Bono in 2007 to 2008, and Josephine Hendon, 2009 to 2010. I'd like to think that the 2 of these women had a great hand in opening up what we are looking at right now in terms of IASA board. Our officers, out of 5 officers, 4 of us are women. And so I think that that's something remarkable. I think that's wonderful. So I just wanted to take a second to announce that. Also, tonight we have 3 wonderful women with us, and they're going to share some reading from their book, #MeToo. I'm going to introduce Daniela right now. Daniela Gioseffi is an American Book Award-winning author of 17 books of poetry and prose. She's published in many, many, many places, some of which The Nation, Paris Review, Prairie Schooner, Poetry International. She's read her work on campuses throughout the United States, Europe, at international book fairs from Barcelona all the way to Miami, and she edits echopoetry.org. So without further ado, Daniela, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just want to mention that the most important accomplishment of my career was a women's studies classic, Women on War, International Writings. It was the first international book on women's feelings for peace and against war. And it's been in print for 45 years from the feminist press. And again, it was a collection of other women like this book is. So I spent years collecting other women and putting them into print, like I do in this book, Me Too, Anche Io, which contains about 25 Italian-American women. Amore and Lorraine Mangione are 2 of them with us tonight. So I'm going to read a bit from my editor's foreword from Me Too, Anche Io, which, by the way, you can find all over the internet, and it's a totally non-profit venture for both me and the publisher, a labor of love. Until I was 50 years old, I never confessed to anyone, not my parents, sisters, husband, daughter, or close friends, what constituted the worst moment of my life, rape by a Ku Klux Klansman, masquerading as assistant deputy sheriff of Montgomery County, Alabama. At 20, I was attractive, stylish, ambitious, and serving as an intern journalist on WSLA TV in Selma, Alabama, away from my home in New Jersey, on leave from Montclair State University the summer after my freshman year, wanting to be the next respected television spokesperson, another Faye Emerson, the Oprah Winfrey of those early days of television. I was an idealist, also naive as a bedraggled child born in Newark, New Jersey, of hard-working Italian immigrant parents. I had been parked in the back row at school with the minority girls and boys at Avon Avenue School, which served the various ghettos of this city. We were the children most ignored by the teachers. My Italian immigrant father had worked his way through Union College, and having earned Phi Beta Kappa and Sigma Psi honors in their liberal arts and sciences, attended graduate school at Columbia University in New York City, among the first poor Italian immigrants to do so, having come steerage passage to America with only the clothes on his back. He had shined shoes, delivered newspapers, carried coal buckets, tended parking lots, stacked books in the college library, slept little, gaining top academic honors with what we came to understand was a near photographic memory. He'd read the complete works of Shakespeare while working nights tending parking lots to enhance his vocabulary, and to a mellow baritone added American pronunciation that rivaled the famed TV newscaster Walter Cronkite. "5'7" tall, with a pronounced limp from when he'd fallen off a table at 2 and dislocated his hip in the one-goat village of Condela from which he'd emigrated, he swore to vanquish anyone who might soil his daughter's honor. He'd crossed the ocean, a boy of 9, alone with his mother, Lucia, her sole protector, to be met here by his father, Galileo, already working as a shoemaker to earn passage for his family from Puglia, Italy. My father, Donato, given the name Daniel by Ellis Island officials, became the manager of a laboratory that made shortwave radios for the military during World War II. He gave William Brennan, later to become a Southern media mogul, a job that had kept Brennan out of the draft and likely saved his life. In gratitude, Brennan gave me an internship in his home state of Alabama at Selma's WSLA TV in 1961, 3 years prior to the Martin Luther King Selma March, Bloody Sunday, and just after the first Freedom Ride. I appeared on an otherwise all-Black gospel show, rode the back of Selma buses with Blacks that were forced to sit there, sat at the wrong end of lunch counters in the back of luncheonettes where Blacks were forced to sit, and drank at fountains marked colored in a town where everything, television included, was thoroughly segregated. All hell broke loose. Crosses burned on the lawn of WSLA TV's studio. I was arrested at midnight in my boarding house. Whereas Blacks were beaten openly in broad daylight, I was taken to jail and sexually abused by an assistant deputy sheriff, a member of the Ku Klux Klan. In those days, and even still today, often, the law in the Deep South were disguised as the Ku Klux Klan. They wore a badge by day and a hood by night. Still, sexually innocent at 20 and unaware of the terrible danger I was in, I became an unreported casualty of the civil rights movement. My association with William Brennan, the TV and radio mogul of the Deep South, might have been what kept me from being murdered as other civil rights activists were at the time. I returned north, depressed in a state of post-traumatic stress, to finish my Bachelor of Arts degree at Montclair State College. Like Dr. Ford, who brought testimony against a young, drunken Supreme Court Justice, Brett Kavanaugh, I can remember neither the location of the jail nor of my boarding house in Selma, nor the exact time and date of the sexual assault, and I never knew my assailant's name. Mostly I remember his face grinning in the dark, his slapping me for politely talking back, and the pain of penetration, his shadow in the darkness above me, and especially his reprimand. Go home, Yankee Guinea girl, and don't come down here telling us Confederates who to live, eat, ride buses with, or be with on television. We like our segregated ways. Go back up there where Italian Sinatra dances around with that chimp jigaboo, Sammy Davis Jr. Go home and live with those jigaboos you love to hang around with. Get out of Selma before we teach you a worse lesson. I can invite all of my pals to have a piece of you next time if you don't hightail it home. I did leave for home and never went back to Selma. I gave up my dream of being a television broadcaster. I never told anyone of my ordeal. I was ashamed, embarrassed, as rape victims, especially women of my generation, usually are. What could I have done to exact justice, knowing the KKK was the law in the Deep South, and I had no good witnesses? Afraid my father, who was ill with heart disease, would have a heart attack, fearing my mother's scolding for having gone. She had not wanted me to. I said nothing. I would have destroyed my father's friendship with Bill Brennan for not protecting me better. Patriarchally Italian, my father was strict about my dating, never letting me stay out late and always insisting on meeting the boys I went out with, making them pledge to protect me and bring me home safely and early. My father cautioned me in those days, before legal abortion, to stay chaste. No good man, he said, would want a woman who wasn't a virgin. I kept my secret about the Klan until the age of 50. I published a fictionalized account entitled The Bleeding Mimosa in a 1995 collection of stories. I write about it here as a fact for the first time. The experience turned me into a lifelong activist for civil rights, women's rights, and environmental justice. My life as an activist has been documented by the prize-winning filmmaker Anton Evangelista in Author and Activist, a film which has been was touring the campuses, Hofstra, St. John's University, etc., prior to the pandemic. Hence the motivation for this book. In these pages, you will find poems, fiction, and essays by women who have suffered sexual assault, sexual harassment, put downs, and general condescension for being female. I'm reminded of what the accomplished Jewish American poet Muriel Rukeyser has written. What would happen if one woman told the truth about her life? The world would split open. And I ponder this from the great African American Zora Neale Hurston. There is no agony like bearing an untold story inside of you. I think the flood of breaking news stories regarding the Me Too movement and the conversations its revelations have blasted open, creating a public forum, allowing so many of us to work through past traumas, able at last to express our anger and sorrow. We realize the culture, the sexual culture, and the mores must change and are changing. We know too that the majority of men in our lives have acted decently. And by the way, I don't believe Governor Cuomo is really guilty of anything so terrible at all. It's not only the attacker I must forgive to free myself of bitterness, but my own self for being naive in my youth and idealistic. Maya Angelou, a great African-American voice of wisdom, has written, rape on the body of a young person more often than not introduces cynicism. And there's nothing quite so tragic as a young cynic, because it means the person has gone from knowing nothing to believing nothing. I am happy to have averted cynicism and become an activist, and justifiably proud in Feminists Who Changed America from 1963 to 75, published by the University of Illinois Press, that my biographical note appears alongside that of the great Supreme Court Justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the woman who has been so instrumental in shaping laws benefiting women, as our governor also has passed good laws for women's rights. May we maintain the strength and marshal the power to defend those laws that recurrently come under threat. The Me Too movement helped to unleash our power. The 2016 Women's March was the largest in history. We have come to the end of shame, self-blame, and silence. We will continue to tell the truth that sets us free. And I would like to just add to that one short poem called The Erotic Furies in the News. Throughout history, men seemed enveloped by sexual temptations, responsive to the incessant call of lustful desire. Women more often look for a mate to make a home for family, to feel loved in and safe. Many men, perhaps most, are obsessed in a grip of carnal fervor, facing arrays of ethical quandaries. It's simple to imagine cavemen bent on procreative urges with no forethought, that driving biological itch. But what of civilized men? Why do many modern tumescent men do what they do? Step into the driven male mind, into the reality of pure urges, the obstinate pressures of hot desires, intense as sheer lunacy, obsession that needs to be understood to end wars, wherein women's bodies are always part of power's booty. Since the dawning of Homo sapiens, since esculent suppliant women, since the rape of the Sabine women, abducted comfort women for Japan's army, the ongoing global trade in sexual slavery, the Hollywood audition couches, the constant rape of women in war, women's bodies as the bounty of male power. Thank you for listening. And I want to introduce now Amore, a beloved Italian-American woman of our community, artist and writer. Her books include many, so I won't name all of them, and they're all available online. Art and poetry reviews and journals. She's done so much. And she might mention her latest. Her creative writing is found in Italian Americana, via so many other books. And she is also in Daughters and Dads, which our friend here, Lorraine Mangione, also edited. Daughters and Dads and the Path Through Grief by Impact Books in 2015. I'm also in that lovely book of, I do want to mention how many of us Italian women loved our fathers and were inspired by them. So I don't want to make the misidea or the wrong idea that we feminists are male haters. Not at all. Many of us have sons and grandsons we adore, and husbands who have been good to us, and fathers that we adored. So please welcome B. Amore, the Italian Americans, A History in PBS 2015. She was part of that. Delirious Naples, A Cultural History of the City of the Sun from Fordham University. She published in 2018, and so many other books. Welcome, B. Amore.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's really quite special to be here with all of you and see among the participants familiar names that we've shared the stage other times together. So thank you, everybody, for coming. So the first piece I'll read is from the book, and I thank Daniela for including me in this very extraordinary collection. So this is called Bad Dreams. The dreams were what really scared her. They were bad, very bad. When she slept at Zia Filomena's, they were the worst. She slept in a tiny, narrow back room at the top of the stairs that led to the summer kitchen, and the adjacent room where her aunt and uncle slept. It was always dark in the room, and she felt very alone. The rest of the rooms were empty, the flowered furniture shrouded with white covers. Silently, those rooms pressed against her small makeshift bedroom where she slept on the daybed. The room was high on the second floor. Sometimes, if there was moonlight, she could see the branches of the big cherry tree against the sky. She knew her swing hung from the tree, and the thought comforted her. Swinging in the afternoons was one of her favorite things to do. And when she began to be frightened, she would imagine swinging on the swing so high that she nearly flew away. But sometimes she couldn't get away from the dream where the big shadow body moved into her bed, pressing against her back, sandwiching her body close to the wall. Then the tingling started down the bottom of her back, between her buttocks, even though her legs were tightly tucked up against her belly. She wanted to cry, but she couldn't. Wanted to scream, but she couldn't. She felt like a prisoner in the dream. The black shadow took over her body and made her feel feelings she had no name for. Feelings that were so strong that she was sweating when she finally woke up, trembling, terrified, confused. She only knew the dream when she was in it. As soon as she woke, it was lost, and she was left holding herself tight so that she wouldn't cry out. She felt paralyzed, the dream fading, leaving only the sense of her head spinning, her body stiff, and a sick feeling in her stomach. She would be exhausted at daybreak, as if she hadn't slept, and when she would keep her head under the covers to hide herself from the light that came too soon. She wanted more sleep, peaceful this time, with no shadow visitor and no pressure, but she felt trapped. As long as she slept in that bed, she was trapped. It was as if the shadow man knew exactly where to find her. In the mornings, she felt sad, tired, alone, and she would sometimes doze off, feeling a bit safer in the light, imagining flying up through the cherry tree where she could swing her legs free. So I'd hoped that that would somehow express the experience that children have often when they've been abused, and often do not even remember until much later in life. So the next is called Not Spring. It's a short poem, pretty autobiographical. It was not spring when we first made love. It was steamy summer. The coarse wool blankets spread on the damp forest floor. Afterwards, you said it was so easy that you didn't believe it was my first time, and joked about deflowering. I wanted to cry after waiting all those years, the springtime of my virgin body wasted. Later, as I folded up the family blanket, I figured there was not much to do about it. Had a sense that we were moving fast towards winter, skipping the melancholy of autumn, as fast as we'd lost the hope of spring. So after years of being told I had to be a virgin when I got married, I finally made my decision in the 60s. I never quite regretted it, but it was not easy. So because of listening to what Daniela was reading, I'm going to read a poem, if Lorraine isn't going to read it, Maria Tarone's Erased. Lorraine, is that okay? Okay, because it actually reflects another experience that I actually had, which I'll tell you after I read Maria's poem, and it's like a mirror of it. I was 21. I was in my first post-college job. I had long straight hair, then, only then. I worked downtown when it was still seedy. I left the office at 5 p.m. I was on an empty street heading home. It was summer. Summer was in me. My new husband was in me. I would soon be home. I saw the man coming. He was lurching, reached out, grabbed hard between my legs. I shook, alone on that street, rooted in concrete, not able to speak, not I, just not. No, that didn't happen. Not to me. Not me anymore. Not I. Nil. Nada. No thing. So that's, to me, an extraordinarily powerful poem. And the title Erased goes back to what Daniela was talking about, her experience and not speaking about it for more than 25 years or 30 years. And it's as if you as an individual are erased. And I remember when I was in Rome, I was 19 at the University of Rome, and I was coming out of the train station, running to catch my bus to get to Piazza Bologna near the university. And this older man in a sort of leather jacket, kind of wiry, I saw him sort of coming toward me, and all of a sudden he grabbed my breast. I mean, I was like in a complete state of shock. And my first feeling was of being completely embarrassed. Did anyone see it? As if it were my fault. Do you know what I mean? And I couldn't believe how precise his grab was. And it was something that, frankly, I don't know if I ever told anybody until now. You know, it's really, really interesting. And Maria's poem brought that up for me. So I think I still have time, and I'm going to read one of Maria Gillen's poems and then finish with Marisa Frasca's very short poem. So Maria's is in Maria Mazziotti Gillen. In our house, nobody ever said. In our house, nobody ever said you're ugly. My sister was beautiful with her white skin, her full lips, her chocolate brown eyes, her straight teeth. She is to the right of me in this studio photo. My mother bought from a photographer who traveled door to door in the Riverside section of Patterson. My brother is on the left, his wide dark eyes in his sweet face that looks solemn, self-contained, as he does now, a doctor for more than 40 years. In the middle, I stare into the camera, my hair a tangle of black curls, my lips formed into a shy smile. I know that I am not beautiful. Even then I knew it. I look like I'm plugged into an electric socket, energy crackling off me as though I already have things I need to do and I can't wait. In our house, we all had our place. My brother engrossed in encyclopedias my parents bought on time from a door-to-door salesman. My sister off to play baseball with the boys on 25th Street, her body strong and athletic. And I, who always had a book in my hand, even at the dinner table. I, who found in books the life I wasn't brave enough to live, who found in language the beauty that lifted me out of the constraints of my world, the cold water tenement apartment, the coal stove, the raggedy linoleum, the light bulb hanging from a cord over the oilcloth covered table. When I announced at 17 that I wanted to be a poet, nobody ever said, "You're insane. How will you earn a living?" Instead, my mother, who sewed the lining in coats in the factories of Patterson, saved pennies every week for a year until she had enough to buy me a pink Smith Corona portable typewriter in a pink case, so I could be the writer she knew I wanted to be. I've always been incredibly moved by that poem because it reflected so much of what I knew in my childhood among my friends, my father's family. So a tribute to a writer, Marisa Frasca, and the power of writing, because this book is filled with writers, you know, people who dared and who believed enough to share their feelings in writing. So here's Marisa Frasca's Battle Dress from her most recent book. Kinswoman, uncover your scars, whether slight, still oozing, or deep pit. Brocade of bruised strawberries, blood-covered rubies, pale pink Chantilly lace. Call on the muses to seam them together into a battle dress. Add a long train of fiery bird feathers. Hang your dress in the closet as proof of pleasures and failures survived. Should your soul one day wake frozen but famished, means you've outlived a dawn more hopeless than midnight with no moon. You've looked into your quiet mirror and something that wants to live begs. Open the closet, slip on the pelt, write. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope I'm not muted. No, I'm not. Thank you, Bea. That was wonderful. And I do remember the time I stepped out of the subway and a man grabbed my breast, and it was just as in that poem, you feel like nothing and you feel like you have no control over your own life. So that was a powerful poem by our friend Maria Terone. So now I would like to, and thank you for your good reading, Bea. And I would like to now introduce Lorraine Mangione, who's a PhD who teaches in the Department of Clinical Psychology at Antioch University, New England. Much of her writing, research, and practice centers around women, including a recent academic article with Donna Luff on the female fans of Bruce Springsteen, who, by the way, a lot of people don't know is half Italian, his mother. And another who with Rosalind Forti on women, aging, and group therapy in the International Journal of Group Psychotherapy, volume 68, and Beyond Midlife and Before Retirement, a short-term women's group. She co-authored with Donna DiCello, Daughters, Dads, and the Path Through Grief, Tales from Italian America, Impact, 2015, an exploration, as I said earlier, of father and daughter relationships and the loss through the stories of 50 Italian American women. So please welcome Lorraine Mangione.
First of all, I want to say that it is so wonderful to be with somebody who says my last name correctly. That almost never happens, so I appreciate it. I'm honored to be included here for this presentation. And as she told you, I first met Daniela when I was looking for women to interview for the research project that Donna DiCello and I were doing on the Italian-American daughters. And both Daniela and Amore are prominent parts of our book. As a psychologist, I still give talks and workshops, either specifically on that research or on loss and grief and spirituality in general. And both of their stories about their creative projects as they relate to loss are always included in my talks whenever I can. So I'm grateful to both of you. When I was invited to contribute to this book, I think my association with Daniela and her reverence for her father, for his strength and his fortitude, led me to what I included, which was my own experience of what I would call, given that I'm a psychologist, my internalized father. And it's the episode I'm going to present here. Donna DiCello, whom I mentioned before, a psychologist in private practice in the New Haven area, who has also written and published poetry, joined me in this project that in the Anki EO book that brought in our fathers. And I will be reading what we submitted together. And I want to say, I do know that not all fathers become a protective factor for their daughters. And I am really grateful for the ones who do. So as I read this, it's called Legacy from Our Fathers. And the first part is from both of us, a paragraph. Inspired by the relationships with our own fathers, we spent a year interviewing Italian-American women about their father-daughter relationships. Their heartfelt, sad, but celebratory stories gave birth to both our research and to our book. With the hashtag #MeToo movement, these stories nudged our consciousness, and we wondered how the father-daughter relationship might be a source of strength and resilience. We offer our brief vignettes. So here is Donna's. Empowerment comes in many forms. Mine came very early in life via my Italian-American father. Though I did not realize it until adulthood, his two encouragements to swim and to read taught me lifelong braided lessons about the power of mind and body. He taught me to swim when I was 5 years old, despite my mother's protestations, at a hardscrabble beach not far from home. My father coached me to slice the water with each stroke, in tandem with wildly kicking my feet. This magically gave me the ability to propel myself forward, edging further away from him, both literally and metaphorically. In those moments, I learned the power of independence and how control of one's body and the feel of its strength contributed to that. Chronologically, I began to read around the same time, my father providing a steady supply of books for me. Once I learned how a string of words across a page made meaning and story, unimaginable worlds opened up. I read about Marie Curie, the Island of the Blue Dolphins, and Nancy Drew, Girl Sleuth. I read at night until my eyes were scratchy with sleep, wearied my mother with trips to the library, discovered poetry, and somehow knew that books and the meaning, shape, and sound of words would be both my fate and my salvation. For those of you who read Nancy Drew.
I did. I lived on.
Yes, unbelievable, unbelievable.
It was so exciting to me.
Yeah.
It taught me to love books and to read Shakespeare and everything else after that.
Definitely. So this is my story. That was Donna's, this is mine. Arriving by bus on a quintessential steamy day in New Orleans, a 23-year-old in this fabled city of jazz, a layover between community organizing in Houston and a graduate school interview in Kentucky. Yes, it's a long trip, but I was determined to see New Orleans for the first time. I dashed off the bus, saw everything possible, grabbed a muffaletta for the ride, and returned breathlessly. While traversing the station parking lot, a man walked up and flashed a badge. He said he was an undercover cop, had seen me soliciting men on the streets, and I was in big trouble. Aghast, I barely understood his words as I stammered. He again described my crimes, ordering me to come with him. In the isolated sea of cars, I felt deserted. Suddenly, an ancient fury hurled from me. What are you talking about? That's crazy. Let me see that badge again. He looked at me, shocked, and disappeared instantly. I hurried inside, quickly finding an actual policeman. He and his buddy ran in pursuit. I returned to the bus. So what made me, a naive, trusting young woman, capable of using my instinct to figure this out and escape such danger? Partly, it was my internalized Italian-American dad living inside me from childhood. My dad was not a typical tough guy. He cried at poignant moments, and his intellect was his greatest asset. But he had a strong sense of self and worth, which he gifted to me through his support, our debates, I should say our unending debates that started when I was 5, he will tell you, and his never failing encouragement to stand up for what was right and true, even against rogue or fake cops. And then the two of us added a postscript, our dads. We hold their wisdom inside us and let that wisdom inspire us and shape us into strong women.
So true. I love that.
So I have one other thing I want to read. But I want to mention first that this is a very compelling book. I was worried, in fact, that it might be all one story told in different ways, but sad as it is, there are many stories and many levels of this issue of sexual harassment, assault, bias, marginalization. And I will admit that as someone who doesn't read a lot outside of psychology these days, I read the entire book. And while it was painful, I loved the voice and the creativity. And in fact, with another faculty member and a student, this book inspired us to write a proposal for the American Psychological Association's yearly convention, and we should know soon if that proposal, which includes this book, is accepted. And I will let you know, Daniela. For this next one, I want to read a poem by Paola Corso, a noted and much published and honored poet, originally from Pennsylvania, called Girl Talk. It invokes the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And although my family was not involved in that tragedy, we came a little bit later. Several of them worked for decades in the garment district. So I feel a connection. I've always felt a connection to that tragedy. So Girl Talk. The Triangle Factory girls say to the Chinese girls, the Indonesian girls, the Vietnamese, the Taiwanese, girls, take your 16-hour workday and glue it to the sole of the shoe. Take your 20-cent an hour wage and glue it to the heel of the shoe. Take the $180 he charges for the shoe and glue it to the padding of the shoe. And the Triangle girls say to the Chinese girls, the Indonesian girls, the Vietnamese, the Taiwanese, girls, take the room with 6 bunk beds and no place to stand and glue it to the arch of the shoe. Take the glue, toxic glue, burning eyes, ringing ears, bleeding nose, and glue it to the tongue of the shoe. Take the fans and vents you don't have, gloves, masks, and aprons you don't wear, and glue them to the threads of the shoe. And the Triangle girls say to the Chinese girls, the Indonesian girls, the Vietnamese, the Taiwanese, girls, take the chopsticks you can't hold at lunch because your fingers are too numb and glue them to the Velcro of the shoe. Take the vertigo, headaches, vomiting, memory loss, shortness of breath, the cancer, and glue it to the glue of the shoe. Take the glue, toxic glue, and put it under his nose, a Nike nose, and anything goes nose, and make him sniff. And then under the poem, it says, on March 25th, 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company factory in New York City burned, killing 145 workers. It is remembered as one of the most infamous incidents in American industrial history, as the deaths were largely preventable. Most of the victims died as a result of neglected safety features and locked doors within the factory building. And I will add that most of them, maybe all of them, were Jewish and Italian.
Yes, immigrant women. And my aunts all worked in sewing in factories. What they did was called piecework, and I thought it was PEACE until I found out that they would have to sew the same sleeve or cuff all day long. Anyway, I want to thank Isa for letting us display our books. And there's so many other fine writers in the book, all Italian-American women. And now, thank you, Alan Gravano, for allowing us to present our work.
No, thank you. So first, what I'd like to do is I have to apologize. I didn't see that Fred Garfe had his hand raised earlier. In addition to Courtney sort of mentioning Mary Jo Bona and Josephine Hendon, he wanted to also salute Dr. Lucia Ciabola Birnbaum, and he has a wonderful little anecdote in the chat for those of you who may have not had an opportunity to see that. If you can't see that, please let me know, and we can archive the chat for everyone.
Oh, I do see it. Yeah.
Yep. And then really quickly, Donna Chirico asked to make an announcement, and then I'll turn to our first question, and hopefully that'll give some others a chance to write some questions, either into the Q&A or into the chat feature. And Donna's announcement is, in October, the National Organization of Italian American Women will hold a roundtable entitled Shattered Madonnas, a roundtable exploring the effects of domestic violence on the lives of women in Italy and the United States. This roundtable will explore the issues of domestic violence against women in Italy and the US, with an emphasis on the complicity of the legal systems in both countries. Anyone interested in participating, please contact Donna Chirico. And then our first question is from Fred Gardefe, so thank you, Fred. His question is, I would like to hear from each participant say something about the woman or women who influenced them as they moved into their respective professions.
Oh, thanks, Alan. And I want to thank Fred Gardefe, who has been very helpful in to our writing and to a lot of women's writing as well. And he gave us a wonderful review on the back of Me Too, Unc EO, and I'm grateful to Fred for that. He's been a great encouragement to our community of writers. Fred, my most important influence was Grace Paley, a Jewish woman I met in New York who wrote very much about her own ethnic literature. And she was a big social justice, women's rights, civil rights, climate, environmental rights. And so I just want to say that she influenced me greatly when I met her, but there were so many others. And unfortunately, my teacher, Rita Licciardola, my English teacher in high school, was my first great influence for writing. And she had a wonderful way, I'll just quickly say, of marking papers. She gave you one grade for content and imagination and a different grade for spelling and grammar, so that if you were a greatly imaginative writer, you could still pass her course, even if you weren't so great at spelling and grammar. And she was a wonderful teacher, Rita Licciardola. And B, who was your influence?
You know, it's pretty interesting. I have to say the first thing that comes to mind is my grandmother, who always said, where there's a will, there was a way. And she was a very unusual woman in her own time, you know, got a legal separation from her wayward husband in 1909 and continued to work independently, bought real estate, you know, had her own business. She was quite an inspiration. You know, I went to a Catholic school, and Sister Gretchen, who was my art teacher, was the most outspoken woman, both in the arts and in writing. And she encouraged both of those in me. I would say those were extremely formative influences. I was also very active in the YWCA, which was a women's organization. And so I I grew up in a world where I felt anything was possible. And my father was actually a large part of that. He took me to MIT when I was 15 and getting A's in geometry for the first time in my life, and took me to see the dean of admissions, who looked at my report card and said, you know, if you wanted to come to MIT, you could. I was tremendously embarrassed that I didn't want to be an engineer at that point. I was thinking of social work or the convent. But there were 8 women at MIT. I remember they looked as though they were in the school uniforms that I was wearing in high school. But my father's belief in me was something that was incredibly empowering. I think that's enough of me.
So true for me too. And that's just one reason why I invited Lorraine, because I wanted the community to see that even though we're feminists, we want our own rights, our own possession of our bodies. We still have a great deal of love for our Italian fathers and for our parents, our immigrant parents who were so helpful. My father was actually my greatest inspiration of all. Lorraine, who was your inspiration?
Well, you know, listening to the two of you, boy, I could talk about my amazing Carol Cope, English teacher in high school. I could talk about my wonderful grandmothers who I was so connected to, but I really have to hand it all over to my mother. And I recently published a chapter in a book called Older Women Who Work. And with my colleague, Kathy Borden, who might even be in the audience here tonight. And we interviewed women who have been continuing to work, even though they don't need to for money and they are past kind of retirement age. And we also wrote in that chapter about what has influenced us in our work. And I have to say, my mother was the original psychologist in the family. And if she had had sort of the affordances and the privileges I had coming later, she would have totally been a psychologist. She was the one that everybody in the neighborhood, the family, friends turned to, whether it was over a glass of wine or taking a walk or sitting in the backyard. She could relate to anybody and everyone. And I feel like I just took her all in, along with my dad, of course, but the psychologist is my mother. So I will thank you, Fred, for that question. I will totally hand it over to my mother, and writing it for that Older Women Who Work book chapter really crystallized it for me at this, you know, way later in my 60s. I finally sort of put that all together. So thank you.
I think if I can just add just a speck, you know, I was thinking of my mother as well, with all of her work in social work, and it's influenced all of the work I did for the Ellis Island Museum show. You know, took me back to the work that she did with immigrants after the Second World War, displaced persons. Do you know what I mean? And that became an incredibly strong impetus for me as I've gone forward, and even the work that I'm making today. So
I have to add my grandmother Lucia, who was love in our family and who nurtured everyone and had 20 children, and only 7 survived. And she had many of them in Italy and some here. But she was the one who taught us love and compassion and expressing of feeling. So yes, Alan.
Oh, we don't have any questions. So there was another comment in the chat that I wanted to state out loud for everyone and give everyone an opportunity, because we have about 5 minutes left, or if there are any other questions. But it was from Rob Marchesani, and it was, yes, we need a panel and maybe a book on toxic masculinity. So since there are no other questions, I don't know if anyone wants to, any of the panelists would like to address that.
Bob, you should write that. You're a psychologist and you could do a good job. We women, maybe we shouldn't write that. It needs a man to write it. But I wanted to say, we can't see who the participants are. And is there a way we can see? When I look under participants, I only see the panelists. So I can't see the, here.
Can I comment on that?
Go ahead.
On the toxic masculinity for a second?
Please do.
Just as what's so important about this book and about other things that have been done is women getting to tell their story of how they got to where they are. I think men have a story too. And I would like to see that thing on toxic masculinity, not in a blaming, nasty way, but in a, what is the story? What got you to there? What helped create that? So yeah, if this gentleman is a psychologist, I think he needs to do it too.
Yes.
So actually, I have something to say because I was listening to NPR yesterday and a woman was talking about, a researcher, about interviewing men who had suffered abuse as children, and some of whom had gone on to be abusers and then moved away from that. And so the psychology is very, very complicated. And I think, Rob, you would be a great person to bring together people to look at different sides of it, because basically a lot of people who abuse, whether they're men or women, and a lot of men have been abused by women, even as they were children. You know, psychology works in an odd way. Sometimes someone who has been abused becomes an abuser themselves. It's not a simple equation. That's why I think it would be important to have a book that is not demonizing, but
Yeah.
is really looking at the deeper issues of why we do the things we do sometimes.
Yes, indeed, because the abusers are often people who have been abused themselves, and they need our compassion too. So that would be a very wonderful book to do. And I see some friends in the audience, Lisa Paolucci, who's also in our book. Thank you for coming. And Maria Fama, who gave us a lovely review for the back cover. Thank you for coming. Thank you all for coming. Anything else, Alan?
Yes, we have one more question, and this will be our last question for the evening, and then I'm going to give it back to Courtney. And this is from Tina. To all of the participants, you talked a lot about positive influences in your life, but did you receive resistance or negativity from family or friends when you decided to tell the more difficult stories of your lives?
Well, I'll quickly answer that my father, who was my greatest inspiration, whenever he got upset with the fact that he lived in a house with 4 women, my 2 sisters and my mother and myself, whenever he was upset, he would go, "Oh, if only I had a son to carry on the name. You women are driving me crazy." You know, that was very Italian, the way he would do that in a passionate anger that I think can be misunderstood by white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture. There is a book that Rob might want to look into, and we could all look into, called The Wasp Mystique. And it isn't prejudice against white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. It simply explains how all we Latin people are pressured by a different culture than our own and afraid to do our own style of baci baci, abbracci, and hugging and kissing and emoting and passionately and yelling and all those things. So my father was a double bind. In a way, he was my greatest inspiration. But he always said he wished he had a son to carry on his name. But before he died, he said, "Why do you want to go to college? You're only going to get married and have babies." But before he died, he said, "You're as good as any son. You put my name in the Library of Congress." Dee, what do you say?
So I think that's a very perspicacious question. I mean, I have to say, with some of the things that happened to me in my childhood, when I shared them with my family, it was extremely, extremely difficult for them to hear and accept. And I think for some, they've never accepted some of the things that I've shared. In my writing, I'm fairly careful. It's a fine line to tread because many people in my family read my writing. And so it's an issue where I feel like I'm on a tightrope a bit, you know, even as I do some memoir writing. You know, it's easier in fictionalized form. Do you know what I mean? And so it's a question as a writer and an artist, how best to be able to share the truth of my own experience, and yet, how can I say, for me, maintaining relationships with my family is very important. So I'm still finding the balance. It's not that easy.
I understand because as I said in my foreword, I never told the story of my trauma until I was over 50, and then I fictionalized it. So this book is the first time I'm really saying it right out as nonfiction. And I'm 80 years old now. So it is very hard. You don't want the family to feel sorry for you. I didn't want my father to have a heart attack when he found out. Many reasons why I didn't share. And Lorraine, what do you say?
I don't think I have been in the position of something really awful to have to talk about, but you know what this is reminding me of, and I won't go into detail about this, but just being caught in an environmental, a hiking hazard where somebody was killed, standing very close to me in the Rocky Mountains. And just that, it was so hard for me to tell my parents because I knew they would be so upset. I mean, so this is in a totally different category, but it was like, I did finally tell them. It was a while after I wrote to them, but it was just, it was just like, I felt like I would just be, they would have to worry about me for the next however many years. Because it's hard to bring up something to the family that that is a little bit out of the ordinary. So that's the only thing. Again, different topic, but hard to bring up an emotionally wrenching kind of thing sometimes. If I were like right near them when it happened or saw them the next day or something, but I was living in Kansas and hiking in Colorado, which I've avoided ever since. So that's the closest I'm coming. So.
And it's very hard to share your pain with La Familia. They worry so much about you.
Yeah.
Alan,
That was our last question, and then I'm going to turn it over quickly to Courtney. But what I wanted to do, I wanted to thank all three of you once again for sharing, being willing to work with Courtney to sort of schedule this webinar. I also want to thank those who attended, as well as thanking those who submitted questions. Courtney?
Thank you all. You know what? Just listening to you guys tonight, it's just amazing. You're so brave and just, strong, very strong women. And I just want to thank you so much for coming and sharing your pieces with us and reading so beautifully.
thank you, Courtney, for helping us to do this and for helping us put it together. Thank you so much, Courtney.
Oh my, yes. Thank you very much. And so next month, like I said, we're going to have a tribute for Diana DePrima. In May, Fred Gardefei and Anthony Mitzel are going to do a piece on humor in Italian-American culture. Just a preview, later on this year, we're going to have a writing workshop and another webinar representation of Italian-American women. We have a couple people also who are going to come on. They're going to talk about their own work. They're going to talk about their books and give, more of a critical bent to the webinar. So I hope that everybody who's here feels comfortable and free to come by and, take a look at our webinars and join up and, enjoy with us. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thanks, Bea. Thanks, Lorraine. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you who came and listened. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.